November 8, 1942. Richmond, California. The chill of the bay carried the scent of oil, steel, and war. A klaxon wailed through the shipyard as dawn broke over the Kaiser Permanente No. 2 yard, a sprawling industrial fortress that never slept. Men in heavy leather gloves and women in bandanas and overalls streamed through the gates, lunch pails clanging, eyes squinting against the floodlights. From the air, the place looked like a living organism. Cranes swinging, torches flashing, rail cars screeching. It was here that the impossible was about to happen. At Dock 8, Foreman Joe Slattery slammed a clipboard against a beam. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes, he barked. That's what they're saying we can do. I say we can do it faster. The men laughed, some nervously, others in disbelief. A pipe fitter muttered, "You can't build a Liberty ship faster than it takes to cook a turkey, Joe." Slattery grinned. "Watch us." In Washington, the Liberty ship program had become the lifeline of the Allied war effort. 441 feet of steel that could carry over 10,000 tons of cargo across U-boat-infested seas. The ships were ugly, slow, and unglamorous, but indispensable. They were the arteries of victory. Henry J. Kaiser, the construction magnate behind the Richmond yards, had stunned everyone by claiming he could mass-produce them like automobiles. Now, to prove it, he'd ordered the entire yard to build one ship from keel to completion in record time. The name of that ship, SS Robert E. Peary, named after the Arctic explorer who reached the North Pole. Fitting, because Kaiser's men were about to reach one of their own. By 6 a.m., the site was a tempest of movement. Sparks rained from scaffolds as welders sealed hull plates together. Riveters hammered in rhythm like an army drumline. The skeletal frame of the ship, the keel, had been laid at midnight. In less than 6 hours, the first 10 hull sections were already in place. Evelyn Evie Moore, one of the famed Rosie the Riveters, adjusted her goggles and wiped sweat from her brow. She was 22, from Bakersfield, and this was her first real job. Her fiancé was somewhere in North Africa with the 3rd Infantry. "Every rivet's a bullet for him," she used to say. She turned to her partner. "You really think they can float this thing in 4 days?" "Evie," her partner shouted over the din, "they said we couldn't build 1,000 of these ships. We're already at 2,000. I stopped betting against Kaiser months ago." Across the yard, in the control shack, the stopwatch ticked. Supervisors marked every milestone, each plate welded, each bulkhead erected. On a massive chalkboard labeled Peary Challenge. Reporters from Life magazine, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Associated Press crowded near the railings, snapping photos of the inferno of industry below. Kaiser himself strode across the catwalk, wearing his trademark white hard hat and overcoat. He wasn't a shipbuilder by trade. He'd built dams, roads, and hospitals. But he understood something few did, that war wasn't just won on battlefields, it was won on assembly lines. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Kaiser, what's your secret to building faster than anyone in history?" He smiled. "Teamwork, prefabrication, and belief. The Peary won't just be a ship. It'll be proof that democracy can outproduce tyranny." By noon, day 1, the hull already rose 10 feet above the dock. Huge prefabricated sections, some weighing over 30 tons, swung from cranes like pieces of a steel puzzle. Each was welded into place with blistering precision. In earlier days, a ship like this would take nearly a year to build. Now, thanks to Kaiser's modular method, entire segments of the hull, deck, and superstructure were assembled in advance at satellite yards, ready to be dropped in like clockwork. The yard's public address system crackled. "Attention crew, Section 8B attached and sealed, moving to bulkhead 3. Cheers erupted, the sound of progress. That evening, floodlights turned the night into day. Crews worked 12-hour shifts, eating sandwiches by the heat of their torches. Every few hours, a whistle signaled a new milestone. The foreman marked off another section on the chalkboard, and the stopwatch ticked on. Meanwhile, word spread across the Pacific and Atlantic. In London, British naval officers followed the experiment with disbelief. One admiral scoffed, "Impossible. We've never built a destroyer in less than 6 months." In Berlin, intelligence officers intercepted the radio chatter. "The Americans are claiming a ship in 4 days," one analyst reported to his superior at the Reich Naval Command. Propaganda, no doubt. But it wasn't propaganda. It was happening. Day 2, November 9th. The Peary's hull was nearly complete. The ship's shape, once just a skeleton of girders, now towered above the dock like a steel cathedral. Reporters wrote that from a distance the yard looked like a city on fire, the forge of democracy. Evie Moore stood on a scaffold, tightening rivets along the forward deck. Her gloves were blackened from soot, her hair streaked with metal dust. Below her, hundreds of workers moved in a synchronized blur. Welders, carpenters, crane operators, inspectors. Each crew had one task, each rotation one goal. Keep the clock running, never stop. A sudden boom echoed from the aft section. A misfired rivet gun. The foreman cursed. "We lose an hour, we lose history," he yelled. The crew doubled their pace. Inside the command hut, Kaiser's engineers watched in awe. The construction schedule, projected at 96 hours, was somehow ahead of time. "We're 12 hours under," one engineer said, running calculations on a slide rule. "At this rate, she'll be ready for launching by the 11th. Kaiser nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it. Let's make history." By the second night, the Peary's deckhouses were being lowered into position. Pre-fitted ladders, vents, and even paint had been applied before installation. The assembly yard worked like an orchestra. Cranes swung, welders sparked, trucks brought in new parts. A massive banner stretched across the main gate read, "The ship that can't be built is being built." Far from Richmond in the North Atlantic, a convoy of Liberty ships fought through icy waves toward Britain. Each ship carried tanks, ammunition, and food. Every day, German U-boats sank another. The men at Richmond knew this. They weren't just racing against the clock. They were racing against death. As midnight neared, the sirens wailed once more, a signal that the Peary's midsection had been sealed. The yard erupted in applause. The stopwatch read Day 2, 47 hours elapsed, half a ship built, half a miracle realized, and still the sparks rained down, bathing the night in orange light. November 10th, 1942. Richmond, California. Day 3. A thin layer of fog crept in from the bay, curling around cranes and gantries like battlefield smoke. The Peary's hull loomed over the yard, a dark steel mountain under floodlights that never went out. The clang of metal, the hiss of steam, and the smell of hot iron filled the air. Foreman Joe Slattery was already on site by 4:30 M, coffee in one hand, stopwatch in the other. The chalkboard behind him showed 47 hours. The words, "Aft Section, Complete," were scrawled in chalk so thick it looked engraved. "Listen up," he shouted through a bullhorn. "We're past the halfway mark. We've proven we can do it. Now we prove how fast America can move when it has to." The crew roared. Riveters raised their hammers like soldiers raising rifles. By sunrise, cranes were lifting the prefabricated deckhouses onto the hull. Entire rooms complete with wiring, doors, and portholes, built off-site and now swinging through the air like puzzle pieces. Each one was welded into place within minutes. The modular method was paying off. Kaiser's lead engineer, Charles Reeder, scribbled notes on a clipboard as the last of the forward bulkheads slid into alignment. "We're 10 hours ahead of projection," he said. "If weather holds, we'll launch by midnight on the 11th. Kaiser smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure the weather cooperates." Over at Bay 3, a group of reporters from Life magazine huddled together as cameras clicked furiously. The headline they were already drafting read, "A ship in days, not months, the American miracle at Richmond." A young journalist named Sam Greer asked one of the welders, "How does it feel knowing the world's watching you?" The man wiped his brow with a grease-stained sleeve. "I don't got time to feel, kid. I just got time to weld." Meanwhile, Evie Moore was back on the scaffolds, working alongside her partner, May Jenkins, an older woman with arms like steel cables and the attitude of a drill sergeant. Evie leaned close. "May, you ever think about what happens when this ship sails?" May's torch hissed as she sealed a seam. "Every Liberty ship's a letter home, honey. You send one, and maybe some boy comes back because of it." Evie looked out across the yard, at the thousands of workers moving like parts of one machine. "Then, let's send it fast." At noon, the sirens blared again. Another section complete. Cheers echoed off the water. The Peary's funnel, emblazoned with the insignia of the Maritime Commission, was hoisted into place. The shipyard clock read Day 3, 72 hours. Kaiser stood at the bow, watching sparks cascade down like falling stars. A Navy inspector beside him shook his head in disbelief. "Mr. Kaiser, I've inspected shipyards for 20 years. I've never seen anything like this. You've turned construction into choreography." Kaiser nodded. "War doesn't wait for bureaucracy, Commander. It waits for results." Word of the Peary's progress reached Washington. The Maritime Commission's chairman, Admiral Emory Land, was briefed on the hourly updates. He looked up from the telegram and said, "If they pull this off, it'll change naval logistics forever." And in Berlin, Admiral Karl Dönitz received the same report from his intelligence staff. "A ship in 4 days?" he muttered. "If it's true, our U-boats will drown under the tide." By late afternoon, the Richmond yard was a storm of flame and thunder. Trucks delivered steel plates every 15 minutes. Electric welders showered sparks onto the ground below, where molten metal pooled like liquid sunlight. Women carried toolboxes as heavy as ammunition crates, faces streaked with soot and determination. In the break area, a tired welder slumped beside Evie. "Never thought I'd be racing the clock for a war." Evie handed him a sandwich. "This isn't a race," she said. "It's a rescue mission." As daylight faded, the final hull seams were sealed. Massive cranes swung into motion to lower the masts and rigging. The sound of metal on metal reverberated across the bay, a rhythm as relentless as a heartbeat. Every clang was another second closer to history. At 9:01 p.m., the lights flickered as the power grid strained under demand. Someone shouted, "Generator 3's overheating." Slattery barked back, "Cool it down. We can't stop now." Crews rushed to restore power, feeding diesel into backup lines. The yard roared back to life within minutes. Kaiser climbed the observation tower, wind whipping through his coat. Below, the Peary looked alive, glowing under floodlights, every weld sparking like veins of fire. Beside him, his assistant said, "Sir, we're running low on acetylene for the final welds." Kaiser didn't hesitate. "Borrow it from Yard 3. If they complain, tell them I said history doesn't take a coffee break." By midnight, the sky was a patchwork of smoke and stars. The final hull inspection began. The stopwatch read Day 3, 90 hours elapsed. The ship was complete, save for the propeller, rudder, and final fittings. Crews moved like ghosts in the fog, shouting over the roar of machinery. Every hand, every torch, every heartbeat counted. Evie leaned over the rail, her voice hoarse. "How much time we got?" Slattery grinned, tapping his stopwatch. "Just enough to break the world." At dawn on November 11th, Veterans Day, the last weld sealed the Peary's hull. The ship stood 441 feet long, 10,000 tons of steel perfection. Only 96 hours and 29 minutes had passed since the first plate was laid. Kaiser called the supervisors together. "Gentlemen," he said, "we've just built a ship faster than anyone thought humanly possible, but we're not done, not until she floats." He pointed toward the water. "Prepare the launch." The announcement echoed across the yard. Workers climbed scaffolds, removed supports, and greased the massive wooden ways beneath the hull. Bands arrived, reporters flooded in, and families of workers filled the bleachers. American flags fluttered from every mast. Evie found a quiet moment beside May. 4 days, she whispered. 4 days and 15 hours. May smiled, and every second of it mattered. By noon, the Peary gleamed under the California sun. The American flag draped across her bow. Kaiser stood beside the sponsor, Mrs. Robert E. Peary, widow of the ship's namesake. She lifted the bottle of champagne, nerves trembling. "May this ship carry freedom across every sea," she said softly and swung. Glass shattered, champagne sprayed. Sirens screamed. The wooden blocks beneath the hull were struck loose. 1, 2, 3. The Peary groaned, then began to move. Slowly at first, then faster. The roar of 200 workers filled the air as the Liberty ship slid toward the bay. The water foamed, the hull cut through, and with a thunderous splash, she floated free. The stopwatch clicked to a stop. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. The crowd erupted. Hats flew. Workers embraced. Some wept openly. Evie watched as the Peary drifted into the bay, steam rising from her deck like breath from a newborn. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." But history wasn't finished. The Peary still had to be outfitted, tested, and sent into service. And soon the world would learn that this 4-day wonder wasn't just a symbol, but a weapon of industrial warfare. November 12, 1942. Richmond, California. The morning after the miracle dawned quiet. The smoke had cleared, the welders' torches were cold, and the shipyard that had thundered with hammers now stood hushed. Floating in the water, gray and gleaming, was the impossible. The SS Robert E. Peary, completed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Workers gathered on Dock 8 in disbelief. Some stared silently, others laughed or wept. A few simply leaned against railings, too tired to celebrate. Evie Moore wiped soot from her face, standing beside her friend May Jenkins. "You ever think we'd finish it?" May asked. Evie smiled faintly. "Didn't think we'd even start." They both looked up at the hull towering over them. 441 feet of steel and sweat, built faster than anyone had dreamed possible. Henry J. Kaiser stood nearby with Navy officials and reporters, his suit still streaked with grime. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes, he said, voice hoarse but proud. "Let's see them call that propaganda now." A Navy officer grinned. "Berlin's going to choke on this one." Kaiser only nodded. He knew what it meant, not just a ship, but a message. America can outbuild fear itself. At 10 a.m., photographers captured the Peary from every angle. Life magazine's lens caught sunlight glinting across her deck, cranes looming like guardians behind her. The photo would appear days later under the caption, "A new Liberty ship, built faster than the enemy can sink them." By noon, telegrams poured into the yard, from the War Department, the Maritime Commission, and even the White House. Congratulations to Kaiser and the men and women of Richmond. The spirit of America sails with the Robert E. Peary, FDR. When Kaiser read it aloud in the cafeteria, hundreds of workers erupted in cheers. One shouted, "Let's build another in 3 days." Laughter filled the hall, but beneath it was something deeper, belief. Across the Atlantic, Allied soldiers listened to the news over shortwave radios. A British gunner in North Africa muttered, 4 days, that's bloody witchcraft. His captain replied, "It's not witchcraft, mate, it's America waking up." Even in London, the Times ran the headline, "U.S. builds merchant ship in under 5 days." Churchill read the report and smiled through cigar smoke. "If this is true," he told his staff, "the Führer's clock is running out." But in Berlin, Admiral Karl Dönitz studied the same news with a cold expression. 4 days, he said. "If they can do that again, our U-boats are hunting ghosts." His aides were silent. They understood. Germany's greatest weapon, time, was slipping away. Back in Richmond, work didn't stop. The Peary still needed fitting out. Engines tested, lifeboats mounted, guns installed. Crews swarmed her decks, racing not from pressure but from pride. Evie and May were assigned to the engine room, where the great triple-expansion steam engine waited like a sleeping beast. As they checked gauges and tightened bolts, May said, "She's ready." Evie nodded. She was ready before we were. That afternoon, Kaiser himself climbed down to see them. "You two worked this section?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Evie said. "From the first plate." He smiled, handing them each a small brass tag stamped, SS Robert E. Peary, Builder. "Keep these," he said. "You've built more than a ship. You've built history." Outside, crowds gathered at the gates, families, photographers, children waving flags. The Peary floated proudly, her hull still warm from welding. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Kaiser, can this be repeated?" Kaiser smiled. "Repeated? We'll improve it." That night, the yard threw a celebration. Music echoed from the cafeteria. Boots stomped to jazz. Someone hung a sign on the wall. 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. America's answer. May leaned toward Evie, laughing. "Think they'll make a movie about this?" Evie took a sip of coffee. "If they do, I hope they show the truth." "What truth?" "That we didn't just build a ship, we built belief." While Richmond celebrated, the Peary prepared for sea. Within 72 hours of her launch, she began trials in San Francisco Bay. Her engines thundered to life, churning the gray water beneath her keel. Navy officers watched closely as she reached 11 knots, smooth and steady. She passed every test. By November 15th, a telegram left the yard. SS Robert E. Peary delivered to U.S. Maritime Commission. From keel to convoy, 7 days. In Washington, Admiral Land circled one sentence and said, "From steel plates to sailing ship in 1 week. Gentlemen, this is how we win." On the dock, Evie and May watched her departure. Smoke curled from her funnel as tugs pulled her from the pier. Her gray hull cut through the bay, flags snapping in the wind. Crewmen waved from the deck, their faces bright with pride. May whispered, "Feels like saying goodbye to family." Evie nodded. "She'll be all right. She's got every one of us inside her." As the Peary's whistle echoed across the harbor, a hush fell over the workers. The ship that had been born of sparks and sleepless nights now glided into history. Across the nation, headlines blazed. Liberty ship built in 4 days. Hitler mocked, America answers. Factory workers cheered. Shipyards redoubled their pace. And somewhere in the Pacific, sailors whispered that if a ship could be built in 4 days, maybe the war could be won in less. The Peary had become more than a vessel. She was proof that the impossible could be done by ordinary people when the world demanded it. And for Evie, standing on the now empty dock, that was all the miracle she'd ever needed. November 12, 1942. The dawn fog over Richmond was pierced by the glare of arc welders, a constellation of sparks flickering across the shipyard. Exhausted men and women filed in through the gates, coffee cups steaming in their gloved hands. It was day 4, the final push. Inside yard number 2, supervisors shouted over the roar of cranes and compressors. The SS Robert E. Peary, once just sheets of steel and blueprints, now towered above the dock like a colossal sleeping beast. Her hull was nearly complete, her superstructure welded into place. But thousands of final details still stood between her and the Pacific. "Shift leads to stations," barked Foreman John Duncan, his voice echoing across the scaffolding. "Let's bring her home, boys." The schedule on the board read 96 hours, 0 minutes, and counting. Henry Kaiser's miracle deadline loomed, less than a day away. By now, every worker in the yard knew they were part of something extraordinary. Newspaper reporters from San Francisco to New York hovered around with cameras and notebooks, capturing every spark, every clang of a rivet gun. The U.S. Maritime Commission had already sent a telegram to Washington. Peary construction proceeding at unprecedented speed. But for the workers, it wasn't about headlines. It was about proving the impossible could be done. Welders climbed along the ship's spine, torches blazing even in the whipping wind. Riveters hung from cranes like acrobats, fastening steel plates with rhythm that echoed through the harbor. In the prefab sheds, teams rolled out new bulkheads, pre-cut and pre-drilled days before, hauled them out by truck, and lifted them straight into position. Every part of the yard worked like a single machine. At the main dry dock, Supervisor Joe Morris was checking the propeller installation. His team had to fit a 17-ton bronze screw in place without the usual delay for alignment. "If this goes wrong," his assistant muttered, "we'll lose a full day." Joe just grinned. "Then it won't go wrong." The crane swung the propeller into place, sparks flew as bolts were tightened, and by noon, the massive screw was locked, perfectly balanced. It was the kind of precision that normally took a week. They'd done it in 6 hours. Elsewhere, teams were swarming over the deckhouse. Electricians snaked cables through narrow passageways. Painters worked right behind them, applying primer while welds were still warm. Women with brushes painted the ship's name in bold white letters, S.S. Robert E. Peary. It gleamed like a promise. By evening, floodlights turned the shipyard into a sea of light. The graveyard shift arrived with sandwiches and thermoses, joining those who had already worked 12, even 16 hours straight. There was no talk of overtime. No complaints. One worker muttered to his friend as they carried a steel beam. "Let's prove them wrong." Up in the command tower, Kaiser and his chief engineers stood watching. The yard clock ticked toward the record. "How's she looking?" Kaiser asked. Chief Engineer Donald Connolly smiled. "We're hours ahead of schedule. The launch could happen before sunrise." Kaiser didn't blink. "Then let's make it happen. The world's watching." Through the night, steam hissed, steel groaned, and men shouted over the thunder of machinery. The Peary was alive. By 2 a.m., the last hull plates were in position. Welders in face shields moved down the seams like fireflies. Inside the bow, crews installed anchor chains while carpenters finished the bridge housing. Someone scrawled on a bulkhead with chalk, "Built in 4 days. Beat that, Hitler." As dawn approached, a light rain began to fall. It didn't matter. Work didn't stop. Tarps were thrown up. Welders lit their torches again. Sparks and steam mixed with the mist rising from San Francisco Bay. Then, at precisely 10:00 a.m., on November 12, 1942, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel had been laid, the final weld cooled. Cheers erupted from every corner of the yard. The SS Robert E. Peary was complete. Kaiser stood before a crowd of exhausted oil-stained workers as photographers snapped away. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his hat, "you've just built a Liberty ship faster than the world thought possible." Applause thundered. Whistles blared. Some workers cried. Others just stared up in disbelief at the 441-foot ship that hadn't even existed a week ago. The Peary's hull shimmered in the morning sun, a symbol of American determination forged from speed and steel. Yet there was no time for rest. The ship still had to prove she could float. By noon, the harbor filled with onlookers. Workers, families, Navy officers, and journalists. The dry dock gates were opened. Water surged in. Slowly, majestically, the SS Robert E. Peary lifted from her cradle, the hull creaking as the Pacific embraced her for the first time. The band from Camp Shoemaker played Anchors Aweigh. Reporters scribbled furiously. The headline would soon read, "Liberty Ship Built in 4 Days, Record Time." As the Peary began to move, a whistle sounded across the bay. Henry Kaiser watched from the platform, his expression calm but proud. "That's not just a ship," he said quietly. "That's what freedom looks like when it's built by 5,000 hands. The shipyard erupted once more in cheers as the SS Robert E. Peary slid gracefully into the water, a steel miracle born from sweat, teamwork, and the will to win. Within hours, tugboats guided her toward outfitting docks where she would receive her guns, masts, and navigation gear. But the record had already been set, one that would stand unmatched for the rest of the war. In just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, ordinary Americans, welders, riveters, carpenters, and engineers, had proven that industrial might was the new weapon of war. And somewhere across the Atlantic in the offices of the Kriegsmarine, intelligence officers stared in disbelief at the reports. America had done the impossible again. September 1945. The guns of Europe had fallen silent. The oceans, once prowled by wolf packs, now glittered with sunlight instead of explosions. On the quiet waters near Okinawa, a gray silhouette steamed steadily toward port. The SS Robert E. Peary. Her decks bore scars from 3 years of war, welded patches, bullet holes, layers of salt and grime, but she was still afloat, still carrying cargo. The miracle ship had endured what so many others had not. Captain Edward Stokes stood on the bridge, cap tucked under his arm. He gazed out at the calm Pacific and murmured, 4 days to build her, 3 years to prove her. His first mate smiled faintly. Not bad for a publicity stunt. Back in Richmond, California, the shipyard that had once thundered with round-the-clock work now echoed with emptiness. The cranes stood motionless. The air smelled of rust instead of smoke. Evie Moore walked along Dock 8, hands in her coat pockets. Beside her was May Jenkins, her friend and comrade through every spark of the Peary's creation. "It feels smaller now," May said softly. Evie nodded. "That's because it's quiet. We got used to the noise of purpose." They stopped where the Peary's keel had been laid nearly 3 years earlier. The steel outline was gone, replaced by weeds sprouting through concrete. Yet in Evie's mind she could still see it. The sparks, the shouting, the ceaseless rhythm of hammers that had once defied the impossible. In Washington, the Maritime Commission prepared the final Liberty ship statistics. 2,110 vessels completed, over 130 million tons of cargo delivered, 1 ship every 3.5 days at peak production, and at the top of the report, circled in red pencil, SS Robert E. Peary. Record, 4 days 15 hours, 29 minutes. Admiral Land looked at the number, exhaled slowly, and said, "This one line frightened Berlin more than a fleet of battleships." The Peary's post-war life was humble but symbolic. After returning from the Pacific, she was placed in the National Defense Reserve Fleet at the James River anchorage. Her gray paint faded, barnacles claimed her hull. Yet she remained on the Navy S roster for years, a silent monument to a time when speed itself was a weapon. Visitors who toured the mothballed ships sometimes asked about the Peary. Guides would point to her rusted outline and say, "That one, built in less than 5 days. Beat that." Few ever could. For the women who had built her, the end of the war brought both pride and uncertainty. Many were asked to return home, replaced by returning soldiers. May Jenkins declined. She stayed in industry, later teaching welding at a trade school for veterans. Evie Moore went to work in a small engineering firm in Oakland, but every November 12th, she came back to the Richmond shoreline. She'd bring a small American flag and a single steel rivet she'd kept from 1942. She'd toss the rivet into the bay and whisper, "For the Peary." Across the world, historians and engineers studied the ship's construction records. The Richmond method became a foundation for post-war industrial engineering, influencing everything from skyscraper prefabrication to modular housing. Even in peacetime, the Peary's speed lived on in the blueprints of modern efficiency. At MIT, a professor lectured to his students. The Liberty ship was not just a vessel of steel, it was a vessel of process. The Peary proved that imagination, when disciplined by method, can bend time. In Germany, captured officers later admitted that the Peary's record had stunned them. During the Nuremberg trials, Admiral Dönitz mentioned it by name. We realized then that the Americans could replace losses faster than we could destroy them. It was the beginning of the end. The Peary's legend grew in the post-war years. Her story appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and children's readers. Life magazine reprinted the iconic photo of her launch, the ship sliding into the water under a banner reading, "Built in 4 days." The caption simply said, "When democracy built faster than tyranny could burn." By the 1960s, most Liberty ships were gone, scrapped, sunk, or broken apart by rust. But the Peary remained preserved in memory. In Richmond, Dock 8 became part of the new Rosie the Riveter Homefront National Historical Park. A bronze plaque marked the spot of her birth. Here, in November 1942, American workers built the Liberty ship SS Robert E. Peary in a world record 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. The ship that helped win the war. Evie attended the dedication ceremony in 1978. She was gray-haired now, walking with a cane, but when the ribbon was cut and the band played "Anchors Aweigh," she felt 25 again, sparks in her eyes. Reporters asked what she remembered most. She smiled. "The heat," she said, "and the belief that we could do it before anyone told us we couldn't." Half a world away, in a British Museum display on the Battle of the Atlantic, a model of the Peary stood beside a U-boat. The plaque beneath read, "Steel defeated stealth. Industry defeated ideology." The legacy of the Peary reached far beyond the shipyard. Her construction marked the dawn of the modern manufacturing age, a world where speed, coordination, and shared purpose could achieve the unthinkable. The lesson of her birth echoed into the space race, into computing, into every moment humanity tried to do the impossible faster and smarter. Evie Moore passed away in 1989. Her obituary in the Richmond Independent mentioned simply, "She helped build the fastest ship in history." Mae Jenkins attended the funeral. As the casket was lowered, she placed a small brass tag on top, the same one Kaiser had given them in 1942, stamped SS Robert E. Peary, Builder. Then she whispered, "We kept her afloat, Evie. We all did." Today, the Robert E. Peary exists only in photographs, memories, and the rhythm of every welder's torch that sparks to life in a shipyard. Yet, her spirit endures. She was proof that when ordinary hands move together with extraordinary faith, steel can become more than metal. It can become meaning. On the waters she once sailed, new ships glide quietly across the horizon. None bear her name, but all carry her legacy. Because once, in November 1942, a nation united and told the world that time itself could be conquered, and they proved it with a ship.